Hello, and welcome to the Amongst Romance podcast, your window to everything Italy from an outsider's perspective. Join us each week as we navigate the Italian way of life and all the adventures that come along with it. Today, we have a special guest on the podcast. I am very excited to introduce you to Nathan Heinrich, who is the host of I'm Moving to Italy podcast. It's a podcast I discovered when I was trying to come up with ideas for this podcast you're listening to right now. And I think Nathan has so many really good stories that are very relatable to someone like me who has moved from North America to Italy. But what I also love about it is that it doesn't just cover the typical, oh, Italy is great, La Dolce Vita, everything is fantastic. It kind of gives you the insights into what it's like to move to Italy as an outsider. And again, all the adventures that go with it. So Nathan, welcome to the show. Tell people about you and about your podcast.
Hello, Kasia. It's so nice to be here. We've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, and I'm really, really happy that it finally worked out for us. And yes, I am just as excited to start listening to your podcast and so happy that you're doing this. And I'm so glad that you found me. And let's see, just to give you a little bit, I mean, we'll get into it, but my website for my podcast is immovingtoitaly.com. So you can find a whole bunch of stuff there. You can follow me on Instagram at Nathan Heinrich on Instagram. And I also have another website called allroadsleadtoitaly.com, where I basically write articles about Italy and just everything from wine regions to Italian products and the best times and places to travel. So yeah, I moved to Italy 4 years ago. And when I was getting ready to move to Italy, I was looking for a podcast just like you were. And so I couldn't find a podcast of somebody documenting their move to Italy. And I was like, you know what? I don't know anything about podcasting. So doesn't it sound like a brilliant plan to just start podcasting? So I ran out and bought, I had a day before my house was going to sell. And I ran out to the local Walmart and bought a cheap little speaker, little microphone, and started recording. And it sounds about like that when you listen to the first episode. But yeah, it's been quite a learning process, and I've grown a lot along the way. And my favorite thing to share on the podcast are all my failures and mistakes. I call them my I call the whole journey to Italy my fumbling, bumbling journey to a new life in Italy. So that's basically what it is. And we're definitely, like you said it well, we're not trying to make it seem like Italy's perfect La Dolce Vita. I want anyone moving to Italy to understand all of the good as well as the bad and the embarrassing and the mistakes and everything that goes along with it.
I think that's definitely true. I've always said that I think a lot of people fetishize Italy. They have this perception of what Italy is or what it is in their mind and how it is. And I think a lot of it has to do with movies, the influence that we see on TV, in movies, and in the past, how everything is kind of played up. And it's like that certain type of Italian that we expect to see. And I think a lot of people realize that when they come here and they go, not into the most touristy places, but they go into other places where people live, and Italians are just regular people. They do the same thing that everybody else does. They walk around. Whenever we go to a coffee shop, there's always, but some bunch of dudes just sitting there trying to talk about how many espressos they had today. And they have the same story. Like, I had 10, no, I had 12. And it's always the funniest thing because they just talk about just the most mundane things that we might think, oh, everybody in Italy has a Vespa and they just drive around with the scarf. And I don't think so. The people who drive Vespas, I don't know how they drive because it's very reckless sometimes when they're driving. It's not like an Italian dream. And, we live not too far from the Amalfi Coast, and the amount of people I see on Vespas there, they're not the tourists. They're just the locals trying to navigate. And that's very dangerous. To me, that's just the whole idea of going down the Amalfi Coast with a Vespa and a scarf is just ridiculous.
Man, you used the perfect word when you said fetishize, the way people tend to just get this completely unrealistic view of Italy. But then the thing that feeds that unrealistic view, besides the films that we watch, from the comfort of our American homes or Canadian homes or wherever we happen to live in the world, and we see this world that just looks so idyllic. It looks almost too perfect for words. And then when people come to Italy, the Italians, to their credit, I think, have sort of contorted themselves almost in the very touristy areas of Italy into this dream image that we've sort of placed upon them because they realize that there's big money in the fact that we have this idea of what Italy's. Oh, well, and if that's what they think Italy is, let's just let's feed into that narrative and let's make it look like Italy really is that way. So isn't it interesting how you can visit Italy if you only went to, like, let's say the Amalfi Coast, like near where you live, Cinque Terre, Rome, Florence, Venice, if you hit all of those like highlight areas of Italy, you probably could believe that that's real Italy, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of Italians play up to that. It's kind of funny as an outsider looking at it, because I think sometimes they're like, no, don't put on your expectations or those stereotypes on us. But at the same time, like, here, we'll play onto that stereotype so you can pay us for it, right? It's a good business sense, I suppose, and it works. So I can see why people have that perception, especially if you come and you're only in the touristy places and you're here for a short time and that's all you see, then definitely that's what it is. For me, the best part about living in Italy is discovering the places what not too many tourists go to, or maybe even going to places off seasons. I always say on the podcast, you know what? The best time to visit Italy is between January and March. Because nobody thinks of Europe, especially Italy and North America, as a winter destination. I know you're from Northern California, so your winter is nothing close to the Canadian winter. But I still think people in North America, they only think of it as a summer destination, not as somewhere you can go in winter and enjoy it. And I always say, people live here all year round. Why can't you come here all year round?
Oh, I love the idea of doing Italy January through March. Even, like, to be honest with you, maybe even backing up a little further into the previous year and maybe going, like, I would say even November through March, or even April, even into April, I find to be a pretty decent month. Basically, it's the times of the year where I think you find Italians behaving very, very much like Italians because nobody's watching them in a weird way. I don't know if that makes sense. You know what I mean? It's like, that's when I don't know. I feel like there's no tourists around. And so a lot of places that are open during tourist seasons are closed. And so those people are not like they're not in tourist mode. And so Italy is very much just, it's not trying to be anything. It's just Italy during those months. And I love it. Those are my favorite months.
Yeah, I would say November as well. I think, I don't know about December, gets a bit busy. I guess depends where you go, but I always say November is great, but people don't think of those months, right? And, what I love about like January, for example, if you go somewhere, it's very easy to spot the locals versus the tourists by what they wear. I was in Naples in January and it was a gorgeous day. It was, I think, 18 degrees. Like, it was ridiculous. I was wearing a light jacket and I took it out because it was just so hot. And all the Italians are bundled up in their jackets. They have hats on and gloves. And I'm like, it's 18 degrees. It's not that cold. But that's how you can easily tell, like, the tourists who are like me wearing, oh, it's so warm, I'm going to wear like a sweater, not a jacket. And the Italians are like all bundled up because it's cold, right?
That's so true. You're absolutely right. It's so interesting. And before you and I started recording together, we realized that we have something in common, don't we? We are both married to Alessandros.
Yes. That was so funny when I was listening to your podcast and you were like, oh, my husband's name is Alessandro. And I was like, same. When I found your podcast, it was instantaneously relatable because A, yes, that's one thing. And two, we both moved to Italy from North America. Mind you, our paths were slightly different, but I still think that was something that I haven't heard from someone else, right? So that was sort of why I instantaneously was like, oh, wow, this is really cool because I can relate to that. And, listening to your stories, some of it was, yes, that's so relatable. And some of it was, wow, like your experience is so different than my experience. So again, it's just comparing to like where you live in Italy, even when you settle down, not just visit, can be such a drastic different experience, right? I live in the Campania region. Why don't you tell people where you live right now?
Yeah. So we live up in the region of Veneto, which is it kind of if it sounds like the name of the city Venice, that's not a mistake because Veneto is where Venice is located. And so we live about 25 minutes from the city of Venice in a very special little area that not a lot of people even know about. It's called the Prosecco Hills, and it's where Prosecco is made, which of course is the Italian version of champagne. And just like in the region of Champagne, France, you cannot call anything made from anywhere else in the world champagne in the same way you can't call Prosecco. You can't call Prosecco unless it's made in this region where we live in this tiny little sort of corner of northern Italy. We're right at the base of where the Alps begin. So from our balcony and our bathroom window or our balcony, we can see the Alps and the snow on the Alps in the winter months. But we're also just a short drive from the Adriatic Sea, and we live in a little town called Conegliano, which is one of the 5 or 6 really important cities where Prosecco is kind of known for. So if you buy a bottle of Prosecco at a restaurant or at a wine shop, it's very possible that it'll have the name either Valdobbiadene, Treviso, or Conegliano on it, which is where we live. And so this area, although the Germans and the Austrians and some Northern Europeans have discovered this area, and they come here, and sometimes they like to do biking retreats, and so you'll see bikers on the road on the hills. But the hills are just covered in the Galera grape vineyards that they make, the white grapes that they make Prosecco out of. And it's just gorgeous. I mean, I go for a walk. I go for 2 walks every day. One walk is in the morning, and I walk up and look out over the hills and the vineyards and the mountains. And then the second walk I do in the evening is up to the castle here, and there's other great views from up there. And so we're in this very walkable little city. It's one of the most beautiful cities that I've ever been in Italy, partly because my heart has sort of gotten attached to the city, but also because it's really a very walkable, beautiful city. And yeah, so that's where we live. And we live here because Alessandro's family, who are originally from where you live, Kasha, it's originally from the city of Naples, in the little sort of region, a little part of the city, the neighborhood called Vomero, which is kind of up on the hill there. So that's where they were originally from. And then one of the family members got a job here in this town. And then the grandparents moved, and then another aunt and uncle moved, and they bought a business here. And then Alessandro's mom moved up here. And then so anyway, everybody ended up moving up here to the north. So now the entire family, my entire Italian relatives and family, are all in this town. And so we spend a lot of time down in Naples. I'd love to compare notes with you and see what your favorite things are to do in Naples, because I don't get there enough. And Alessandro thinks that your region where you live is literally the best region in Italy, and everything from there, including the food, the wine, everything is the best. So I love Northern Italy, where we live in Veneto, because it's clean, it's elegant, it's a completely different vibe than the southern part of Italy. But the people are a little different, and the food's a little different. So there's benefits to everywhere where you live in Italy. There's 20 regions in Italy, and they're all different. And so, as I'm sure you're getting ready to discover.
It's always amazing to me how many people, let's say, would go to Venice but they would never go to where you live and explore all that wonderful vineyards and all those beautiful things that are just stone's throw away, because they only go to Venice. They go to the most touristy parts and then they say, oh, I hated it. And that always makes me so sad because I love Venice. It's really one of my favorite cities because it's just so beautiful. And that's kind of why we started this podcast, to kind of introduce people to not just the touristy version of Italy, because I think that's also a great part, but also to talk about places that they might not know about and, might want to discover. I want to ask you, in what way has your perception of Italy as a tourist destination changed since you moved here?
Oh no, that's a very, very good question. It certainly has changed because when I first moved to Italy, so I started coming to Italy when I think I was 21 on my first trip to Italy. So that's been quite a while ago. I don't want to tell you how many years, but it's been more than 20 years. And so that was my very, very first impression of Italy as a complete tourist, right? So I did what everybody does when they come to Italy. I think what everybody should do is to see all the major highlights. You have to see the Colosseum. You have to see Venice. You have to, float down, the Grand Canal in a gondola. You have to do those kind of things, right? So then fast forward to Alessandro and I reconnected after having met in Italy all those years ago. We reconnected, got married, and started coming to Italy together in 2016. And it was in 2016 when I started to understand what real Italy was. And it was the first time I'd come back to Italy since I'd been here the first time. And I learned, because we came to this town where I'm living currently in the Prosecco Hills, and I discovered this area, and I was like, I thought I had died and gone straight to heaven. Because, like you said, so many people will come to Venice, but they won't come here. And so it was only locals. It was almost like I had stumbled on this little secret that I was afraid to even tell anybody about, because I was like, please don't anybody ever discover this. And here I am talking about it on a podcast. So, I hope that if you're listening to this, you do come here, because it's still quite under the radar and it's very worth seeing. But to get back to your question about how has my view of Italy changed as far as since living here versus being a tourist, I originally thought I was going to, because I fell in love when I first started coming to Italy again. I fell in love with the Amalfi Coast, and I really fell in love with those beautiful hills and those steep cliffs. And I was like, I just need to buy a piece of land so I can garden and have views of the sea, and that's what I would need to have. I just need to have a view on the Amalfi Coast looking out. And then I realized, the more time I spent there, that the Amalfi Coast was just always going to be inundated with bus loads and boat loads and car loads and van loads and plane loads of people. I mean, and granted, not all year long, from April to September, but especially like June through August, it's just too much. And so I experienced enough tourism and enough of real Italy to realize the Amalfi Coast, as beautiful as it is, it's just not where I want to live. And so as I've spent more and more time, and I'm, from the beginning, I've been kind of searching for this property, and I'm still searching after almost 4 years of living in Italy. I was still searching for this perfect farm. I've thought I've found it several times. I'm narrowing down on it. I've completely changed regions. And what I have discovered is important is to have a city, for me at least, a city with a train station in it, so that you can easily get where you want to go, a walkable city. You and I were talking before we started recording about how important it is to have a place that has Italian language classes, if that's possible. It's really nice. My city had those free Italian language classes, and I was able to take those for 2 years. That was amazing. So there are so many cities that you've never heard of in Italy that have so many wonderful things about them, and hospitals and all that stuff. And so if you just sort of allow yourself to almost get lost in Italy and discover things, or maybe talk to someone who lives in Italy, listen to a podcast like yours, of course, and you'll start discovering that there are so many wonderful places in Italy that just aren't on the radar for everybody. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I guess my tolerance for touristy areas has gone down with each passing year. And if I ever am going to find myself in somewhere like Venice or the Amalfi Coast or Rome or those places, I try to do it during the months that you and I just talked about, during the off season, because the worst thing in the world is to be like anywhere near the Trevi Fountain in Rome or someplace like that in July. That's like my worst nightmare. Right?
Oh, that's so true. I think my experience is very similar to yours. Part of it is I understand why people want to come to these big cities or like the smaller places. But at the same time, you start looking at them differently. Like I've been to Naples so many times. So for me, Naples is just like, it's a great city. I love it. It's not that new to me. So I almost enjoy seeing it through other people's eyes who it's the first time they've come here. But at the same time, I've had people say to me, oh, Naples, oh, it's so dirty. It's so this. And I'm like, is it though? I've been to many places in the world that are dirty. Like if you're talking about like garbage, you can see garbage everywhere, especially on the day before they collect garbage. The city is like thousands years old. There'll be some grime on it, but otherwise it's not a dirty city. When you look at Vomero, which is a beautiful area, it's not the type of Naples that people think about when they think of Naples, right? So if your only experience is outside of the Naples train station and that's all you know, then you haven't really seen it. I love to show people the different parts of it. I listened to your podcast about you had, I think it was friends of yours that came from the US and you went with them traveling and you said to them, do you guys want to see like my Italy or do you want to see like the touristy Italy? That is so relatable because again, I had a friend who visited me from Canada in November and we kind of did the same thing. So I thought this would be such a great conversation because we're both outsiders who now live in Italy. And I would love to talk to you more about your version of Italy. And I've listened to your episode. I know what happened, but give us some background on your experience and how your friends perceived your version of Italy.
Well, this is a loaded question, Kasha, because it's interesting because now I have two things to compare it to. I have a friend that just literally left and got on a plane in Rome today and flew home. And so now I have something to compare that experience that was 2 months ago. Those friends that came from Tennessee in the United States. So they were from the southern part of the United States. Lovely people. They had never been to Europe before. And so for them, it was a first time experience. And I asked them before they came, like, okay, so there's two, like what you just said, there's two Italys. There's the Italy that you run around like a chicken with your head cut off and you try to cram it all in. And if that's the trip you want, God bless you, but I cannot be part of that trip. So if it is, I'll give you some tips. The first tip I said was come, whenever you do come, make sure it's during kind of the slow season. So they came in April. So that was great. They took my advice there and they said, well, no, what we want is we want your version of Italy. And so I said, okay, well, let me tell you what my version of Italy looks like. You focus on one general area. That means I live in northern Italy. You want to see the Italy that I know best. That would be northern Italy. And so what I suggest is you rent an apartment, one place, a villa or an apartment, and you have a stationary home base. And then we do day trips, not all the time, not every day, but we do some day trips. And you have to do a minimum of 2 weeks because I don't think that some people try to see all of Italy in 1 week, which I think is the most insane thing anybody could ever do in their life. Unless you're a teenager and you've got all kinds of energy and you want to just see it for the first time. But still, even 2 weeks in northern Italy is not enough to see all of Italy. So I told them, we're not going to see everything, but we will see We will go to Milan and we'll spend a couple nights in Milan. And then from Milan, we'll go to Switzerland. We'll go to Lake Como. We'll, we'll do things like Venice here close by. We'll go up into the Alps. We'll go up to my favorite region that's in the Alps, Trentino Alto Adige. We'll go to my friend's winery up there, and we'll go through the Prosecco Hills. We'll just see local stuff, but kind of slowly. We'll go to local restaurants. We'll just keep it super, super real. And I asked them before they came. Now, the other question I have for you is, what kind of food preferences do you have? Do you have any food preferences that are like non-negotiables, like the things that you won't eat? No, we'll eat anything. We'll eat anything. We want to just try. We want to be exposed to Italy. So I was like, okay, all right, well, we'll see how this goes. So they came and we traveled all over basically the itinerary that I just shared with you. And they had a lovely time, but it was interesting for me to experience Italy. How you said it, sometimes you like to see Naples through the eyes of visiting friends or family that come to visit. It was interesting for me to see Italy through the eyes of non-traveled Americans who are in their 60s, who are from the South in the United States. And it was interesting because it did not go as I had planned. And I don't think it went as they had planned either. So first of all, I didn't know that they needed to have a Coca-Cola with every meal. I didn't know that. Yeah. I didn't know that that they were going to think that Italian food was bland and tasteless, because Americans' version of Italian food is heavy, creamy, overspiced, over-garliced, over-sauced, overcooked, over everything, giant portions of heavy food that Italians don't even consider to be Italian food. And so when they started encountering fish that they'd never heard of or seen shapes of or textures of, when they started like experiencing dishes that were not in their comfort zone, they were ordering pepperoncino peppers to put on everything to just like blast the flavor and the hotness up. And I was just like, what is going on here? And there was a lot of time spent on Instagram and Facebook talking and texting people that were asleep in the United States. And I was just like, the awareness of like the time zone difference, it was a very enlightening experience. It was good for me to have it because it's taught me that taking 2 weeks off of my work schedule to show Italy to people who discover that the real Italy that they thought they wanted to see, that they told me they wanted to see, and that I showed them, in reality was not the Italy that they actually wanted. They really didn't realize what they wanted was the tourist version of Italy. But now I realize that's what it was, because their favorite meals, here we go, were when we had pepperoni pizza and when we went to McDonald's and Japanese food.
Where did you find pepperoni pizza?
Well, I kept telling them there is no such thing as pepperoni pizza because pepperoni means something different. It doesn't mean the same thing. And so then I was like thinking, okay, they really want pepperoni pizza. And they kept complaining because, there's these strange things on the pizza like artichokes and, prosciutto and olives and all these very Italian toppings on the pizzas, and very few of them, as it's not like loaded full of stuff. And so we went to this one restaurant, and I just, out of frustration, I just said to the waiter, do you have like salami picante? Like, do you have like a spicy salami that you could put on the pizza? And so then I just realized, if I want a pepperoni pizza, I just say pizza con salami picante. And that's what I started ordering them. And they were happy as clams with their Coca-Cola. And I don't know. They didn't like the coffee. They didn't like so many things. And I was just like, you're experiencing the wrong version of Italy, right?
That's incredible. But I also think it's so probably common because there's two types of people, I think, who come to Italy. And I'm pretty sure the first timers, like the people you were touring around with, the first timers are really looking for like what they expect, right? They want to have that pizza. They want to have the familiar things that are probably more common in touristy places. They want that fettuccine alfredo. They don't know it doesn't exist in Italy. They want that chicken parmesan. It doesn't exist in Italy. So they don't understand the differences. And I always think it's so funny because we sure in the States, but in Canada, we have so many Italian foods that we think are Italian, right? So yeah, spaghetti and meatballs, you have that chicken parmesan, fettuccine alfredo. We all think those are like staple Italian foods. Even like with Caesar salad, we think that's a staple. And they don't have that here. So actually, we went to this one restaurant in a town near us, and they actually had Caesar salad on the menu. And I thought, I'm like, okay, should I try this and see what it looks like? I'm just going to try this salad, right? I don't know what they think of Caesar salad, but I want to see it. So this bowl came up, and I think it was like iceberg lettuce to begin with. Then it had really lovely like ribbons of like the pecorino cheese, or maybe it was cheese, which was great. And it had really big croutons that were not like the same croutons we imagine. And then there was like a separate bowl with mustard. And I thought, okay, what's this mustard for? And I'm like, where are the anchovies? And I'm like, they must have forgot to bring it, right? So then the waiter came over and we're trying to like say, where are the anchovies? And like, why do we have mustard? Anyway, I think they were just like, no, this is how it comes. And we're like, that's not a Caesar salad. Anyway, it was just easier to just say, okay, you know what? We'll take it home. We'll make our own dressing and I will just eat it that way. I knew, like, part of me knew I shouldn't order it, but at the same time, I was so curious to see what it looks like. And I was like, I need to see it. And yeah, it was horrible. It was not what we think of Caesar salad back home. So I think that's also something that people don't realize when they come to Italy. So then you have the second type of traveler. It's the people who might have been here already, or it's been a while since they've been here. And I think those are the kind of people who are sort of looking more for that maybe less touristy experience. Well, let's be honest. If you come to Italy and you spend all your time in Rome lining up the Colosseum, the Vatican, all the touristy places, and you're just constantly being squished like a sardine with everybody else, you're not going to enjoy that. So if you go away thinking, my God, this is Italy, I did not enjoy it, you might be a bit more hesitant coming back, or you might be coming back with like, I want to see something else. This type of traveler will be the one that says, okay, show me the other places you can go to. Tell me about like the other experiences that I can try, the foods maybe I want to try. And that's the kind of visitor I think is the one that will be looking more for that additional content. Whereas the first timers are really into like, no, I want to know, I want to experience that La Dolce Vita and that whole, what I think Italy is going to be.
It also depends on the type of person who they really are deep down in their soul. Because there are some people who are not looking for the Italy beyond the tourist trends, the tourist crowds, the posts that they see on Instagram of the little wine window that they have to go to get wine in Florence, or they have to go to this little place to get this one specific sandwich. If I don't go to get a panino at this one spot, my trip will be incomplete. If I don't get gelato from this one place that just happens to be viral on Instagram, then my whole trip will be ruined. And so there's those people, and they're going to come to Italy. They're going to take pictures. They're going to post pictures on Instagram, on Facebook. They're going to show all their friends. They're going to have had the quote unquote Italian experience. And they're going to go home, and they can't wait to come back in a few years and repeat the same thing over again because they loved it so much. Those people, if they did know that there was a different version of Italy, they couldn't be bothered with it. And they don't want to know that version of Italy. And actually what I've come to feel and believe very strongly is thank God for those people. And thank God they're not looking for real Italy. Because you and I would have nowhere real to escape if they were looking for real. If everybody that came to Italy was looking for real Italy, Italy would be changed forever. There would be no secret places, no quote unquote like hidden gems to discover, and to local spots that aren't on anybody's radar. So I used to have kind of a little bit of an attitude about tourists. Now I'm so glad that they exist, and I'm so happy when they stay in their, zones where they like to hang out, because I know how to avoid them. And so I can go through Italy year round. I've lived here it's gone through several years now of living here during the whole year. And I can live here in the middle of tourist season and hardly ever see any tourists because I know how to avoid them. And that's the beauty. I'm sure you can relate to that because you live in small town Italy as well. So you probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I mentioned that I just had a friend that went back home to California who was here with her daughter. So she is someone I have known for years and years, lovely person. Her and her daughter came, and her daughter just graduated from high school. And so her dream was to go to Italy. And so her mom was like, let's do a mom and daughter's trip to Italy. And I asked her the exact same thing I asked those other friends. I was like, which Italy do you want to see? Because again, now that I've really learned my lesson from just 2 months ago with these other friends, you tell me, and she convinced me just like they did that she wants real Italy, but she also said, listen, we're going to be down. We're going to, we want to maybe fly into Rome and see Rome a little bit. And then we want to go down to the Amalfi Coast. And she started telling me about Sorrento and Capri and all these things. And I was like, okay, so you want to see Southern Italy and you want to go to the Capri and you want to see the Amalfi Coast. All right. Now, are you open to seeing those things, taking out of your 8 days that you're going to be in Italy, seeing a little bit of Rome and stopping in Capri and maybe driving down the Amalfi Coast, renting a car, but then spending like maybe 6 days or 5 or 6 days just down the coast, maybe 45 minutes or an hour south of the Amalfi Coast? My friend owns a place and a bed and breakfast down there. It's totally off the beaten path. And she will show you the real Italy. She'll take you to private beaches. She'll take you out on her boat. She'll take you to restaurants that don't have a word of English on the menus. And I was like, if you're interested, I'll hook you up with that. And so she said, oh, that sounds great. So what do you think her favorite part of that trip was?
I would say it was the part with your friend with the hookups.
100%. So my friend Simonetta, so it was my friend Angie and her daughter Josie, and they're just the loveliest people in the world. And then my friend Simonetta, who also has a daughter who is a little bit younger than Josie, but anyway, Simonetta and her daughter Lucrezia live in this little tiny village called Finocchito. The biggest city near them, which is just a few minutes drive away, is the city of Agropoli. You know Agropoli.
It's a gorgeous piece of like stretch of sand. I mean, coast in that area.
Yeah, so that's where it was, right near Agropoli. And they went to, you probably know Pisciota and Camerota and all of those areas. They went to all of those little towns, and then they took like a boat over to Capri one day and experienced all those insane crowds and on the Amalfi Coast. And so they realized exactly what you just said. They realized that the best parts of Italy that they loved the most were when they were cooking in Simonetta's house with her mom and their neighbors, and like experiencing Italy just like real Italians do. So anyway, those are two different experiences from Americans who recently visited me. And I learned just as much, I think, about Italy and what to help and how to guide people I think I learned just as much as they did. So yeah, two different approaches and two different sort of perspectives on Italy. So yeah, it's very interesting. Depends on who you are and what your priorities are, right?
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, I think most people coming to Italy would not have a connection like your friend, right? So for them, they don't know how to experience that, non-touristy Italy, because if they don't speak Italian, they don't know how to get to those places. But that's what I love. We have the podcast. I have the blog about Italy. I love sharing with people those kind of places that they might not know about. So we live in sort of like the middle of the Campania region. And there's a town like half an hour down from us. It's called Benevento. And it's a beautiful little town. And you go there and there's a Roman amphitheater. They have some other Roman ruins. That's where the strega liqueur comes from, because it used to be known as a city of witches, and strega means witch. And it's a very beautiful town, but not many people know about it. So for me, it's like, if you're already coming to Naples, why are you only going to Sorrento, which is not even part of the Amalfi Coast, and Positano? Like, if that's your whole experience of the Amalfi Coast, then you haven't really seen the Amalfi Coast. And I always laugh when people say, oh, my favorite town was Positano. And I'm like, why? Did you see any other ones? If you only saw Positano, it cannot be your favorite. We actually have a friend who has a restaurant in Maiori, and we always usually stay in Maiori because it's easier for us to get in that way. But it's also less touristy. So it's like, if you're looking at even the Amalfi Coast, like when my friend was here, we went to Maiori, Minori, and then we end up driving all the way down to Positano. And even she said, I kind of liked it better in the other part. And we went, it was November, but it was still pretty touristy. And the service was pretty horrible. Like, they couldn't care less, because you're a tourist, you're going to pay anyway. And there were so many more people. And it was just a bit more, I don't know if commercial is the right word, but it kind of felt more commercial. Whereas when we were in Maiori, Minori, it was a totally different experience. I said to her, I wanted you to see both, because it's also something that most people don't realize. They go to Positano, Sorrento, Capri, and that's the whole experience. Maybe they stay in Naples and then they leave. But Campania, like you said, it's got so much to offer. People always go to Pompeii. I always say, go to Herculaneum instead. Herculaneum is way more interesting. You can see more, and it's smaller. Pompeii can be overwhelming. But there's so many different things. There's Caserta, which is a gorgeous palace. I've been like few times, and it's never that busy, right? It's never that busy. And then we discovered this, well, I've looked it up before my friend came, but it's basically this theater in the mountains. And if you see the logo of the podcast, that's where it was taken. So it's this random Roman theater that was built on a mountain. And there's like a trail going to it. It's not very clearly marked. And when we went, there was like one other Italian family there. They were just like these Italians looking at us going, who are these foreigners and how did they get here? So again, to me, that was a hidden gem. That was kind of discovering the non-touristy Italy, because most people don't even know about it. We went and it was gorgeous. Like, it was such a beautiful place to discover. I don't think a lot of people know about this place. That's the kind of hidden gem that I can show you. That's the kind of things you can discover. We went to a chestnut festival, which she never had chestnuts before. So that was also an experience. And I think she enjoyed that part of it. She appreciated seeing Pompeii and the Naples experience. But again, we went to Naples. We didn't just go to the center and just stay there by the train station. We went all the way around. We visited different parts. And again, trying to show people that it's a city where people live, right? People live there every day. The city is old. It's not like you're going to go and just be like, oh, this place sucks and leave. I think even in big cities, people still can find like the sort of undiscovered things that let's say that as a tourist, you might think it's undiscovered, but the locals are perfectly familiar with. When I say to people, when you go to Venice and you only stick to the touristy parts, you're not going to like it. Venice is beautiful. And if you just veer off the main path and you go into the smaller streets further away from the crowds, that's when you'll find the Venice that is just magical, right? And yeah, I love Venice.
That's so great. Well, the fact is that you probably go to Venice at the right time of the year, because I have to say, I've had a little bit of a bad attitude about Venice for a long time because there were too many crowds and I went there too many times at the wrong time of the year. And then this crazy thing happened in the world where the whole world, and especially Italy, got shut down for tourists, and there were no tourists. But being a local here and only being 25 minutes away or so from Venice, we went into Venice during, I guess it probably was 2021. And that's when the water had cleared up because there were no tourists and the water was clear and there were dolphins like, in the Grand Canal, like for the first time in so long because, there was no activity. And I was like, wow, this is a magical city because there's no one here. But you can really get that same experience. And that's what's so amazing about what you do. I love what you do, the stuff that you write, the guides that you do, the way that you talk about Italy. That's what's so great for your listeners of your podcast and your readers is that you've got the inside scoops of all these spots. I mean, I was watching one of your videos about you in this beautiful Roman theater. Well, it probably wasn't the same one that was up on the mountains, but I love what you do. And I suppose that if you're listening to this conversation we're having right now and you would fall into the classification of someone looking for real Italy, that's what you're here for. I mean, that's what you do, which is so great. And I've learned things by watching your videos. I've learned things, and I know I'm going to learn more as I start listening to your podcast. Now you got me wanting to go back to Caserta. I went there once, but Caserta's amazing, but you're right. One of the biggest, most beautiful palaces in the world. And so many people, it never even hits their radar because they're so eager to get out to Capri or, Positano, like you said. So yeah, I love what you're doing. And I think that there's a growing market for what you're offering people and your guidance and your sort of inside wisdom and knowledge of Italy. I think there's a real hunger for that because as frustrated as you and I are by tourists living here in Italy, tourists and visitors coming to Italy they come and they're very, very disenchanted by the experience that they have because they are sold a version of Italy online. And then that version of Italy never includes crowds and sweaty people all thronged around them, trying to get into the same little restaurants. And so I think that it's amazing what you're doing and what you're offering is so great because the people who have maybe come to Italy once and realize like, if this is Italy, I don't like it. Or maybe they say, when I go to Italy, I want to make sure for the first time that that's not the version of Italy I experience. That's what I love about what you're doing because it gives people a great alternative to all the tourist traps.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. And, I started doing the blog and then the podcast because I love Italy. And I've been coming to Italy for many years. And I have a degree in history. I studied the ancient Rome, but I also studied Renaissance. I had very good profs who were very influential in what my life turned out into be. And I wanted to have that. I want to share that experience with people, right? Because a lot of people think, oh, history is boring and history is just sort of lame. It's a bunch of dates to remember. But history is such a fascinating series of events that lead one thing to another. And Italy, for me, as a person who loves history, who loves Roman ruins, this is really the best place for me. So I love that part of it. And that's what I love to share with people. People say, oh, I come here for the food. For me, I love food, but it's not my main reason, right? I would come to Italy. And if you want me to talk to you about the ruins, the history of it, the places, I'm all into that. You ask me about food recommendations and I'm like, I don't know. Pizza is good in Naples. it's sort of not my strength. That's why Alex does a good job on our show because he loves food. He's all about the food. And, being Italian, his family has been cooking the meals. He's way more familiar with the different ingredients than I am. So he always gives that perspective because he is a foodie. He loves to eat. He loves to cook. And Italy has so many different flavors that people are not aware of. So the foods you guys probably have where you live are very different than the foods we have here. And that also is fascinating, but not as fascinating as ruins, as palaces, as the historical parts. And yeah, and that's why I love it. Like I love places like Florence. I love places like Venice. Are they touristy? Yes. Should you go visit them? Absolutely, because they are fantastic for a reason. And that's why I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to see just Florence or Rome or Venice. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that if you want to see all three in a week, you're not going to enjoy it because they're not that close to each other. I mean, they're not that far, but they're still not that close. I think that's another thing people coming to Italy don't necessarily realize is how big the country is. Even from like Rome to Capri or the whole Naples and the peninsula, it's still a while. Like it's still like a 2.5 hour drive, 3 hours depends on traffic. But it's not like you can just go see Rome in a day, take a quick trip, see Naples in a day, and then go off to a next place because you're not going to enjoy it. And I think what makes some people's experience negative, it's because they don't have the right expectations. So now that we talked about the different experiences, and I'm glad you shared both your stories with the type of visitor, what advice would you have for somebody who's coming to Italy, maybe for the first time and is looking for that untouristy Italy?
Okay, that's a great question, and it's a hard question to answer, but I'm going to do my best. I think if I was going to give you one golden rule to follow, it would be to resist your urge to see it all in one go. You know, I would tell someone, like, let's say someone is like, "Oh, I want to come and I want my trip to Italy. I'm going to blow 20 grand on this trip to Italy, I want to spend 20,000 and I want it to just be the trip of a lifetime." My suggestion would be take two $10,000 trips to Italy and don't do the $20,000 trip. Do two $10,000 trips to Italy. Since we're talking in money, I don't ever usually talk in how much money people are going to spend, but I'm just throwing out a number. You can easily make two trips to Italy probably for $10,000 if you budget it correctly. But the point is, don't try to see it all. At the very least, split Italy in half and try to turn southern Italy into one experience and northern Italy into another. If at all possible, try to be somewhere, if you know that you want to see Milan and Venice and maybe Florence, okay? Maybe you want to see all of those major cities. Don't go any further south than that and stay somewhere that's centrally located, like a city like Bologna or something like that, where you can easily take a train to any of those other three major cities and lots of other little cities, and try to stay for as long as you absolutely can. Stay in an Airbnb, but sometimes I love to tell people, don't even stay in a city like Bologna, visit Bologna, but maybe find a train station city. In other words, a city that's got a train station that's smaller. That's maybe a city like the city I live in that has a train station, Conegliano, or a city like Padova or Treviso, or some smaller city that is totally off the tourist radar. Stay there, rent a place for the whole time, and then make day trips. But don't do a day trip every single day. Take a day where you spend becoming known by your local coffee bar, where you become kind of a regular at a restaurant, and they know you, and they know what you like to order. And there's nothing more wonderful than becoming, even just for 10 days or 2 weeks, becoming sort of a quote unquote local, or feeling like a local. Because if you go get a cappuccino every morning at the same coffee bar, every single morning, even if you're getting ready to go on the train and go to, I don't know, whatever city and spend the day in whatever city, and then you come back in the evening. But if you start the morning, every morning at the same spot for coffee, and you get a cornetto, or, whatever it is that you like to order with your macchiato or espresso or cappuccino, those people will recognize you. They'll smile at you. They'll start to maybe ask you questions. If you speak any Italian, they'll try to speak English to you. And you kind of almost like you make a connection, and Italy feels warmer. Italy feels more friendly. People care. It's amazing how if you're kind and you're just consistently showing up with a smile, and leave a euro tip on the counter every time you order a coffee, and you just are a kind, decent human being, it's amazing how lovely the experience is that you will get. So I guess all that to say, I know that's a lot, but all that to say is, I guess the one thing is, if you were going to just sort of boil all that down to one concept, is resist the urge to try to see it all in one go. And even if you do, try to sort of like do the hack where you are seeing a lot, but you're also still staying central in one spot and using it as your home base to take day trips out on trains. Because that's one of the things that's wonderful about Italy. You could rent a car, of course. Renting a car is lovely. I highly recommend it. Renting a car gives you more versatility because it gets you into smaller cities. It gets you off the beaten path even more than the trains do. But if you don't want the hassle of having to park a car and drive the car, and you want to experience Italy by train, anyway, either way, I think that method that I just mentioned is a really, really effective way to see real Italy.
I would definitely agree with that. It's something that I always tend to say. But I think another point I have not thought about till we had this conversation is to have an open mind. Because I think if you come with preconceived notions of what Italy is, what food should look like, what it should taste like, or what it should be, then you're going to be disappointed, because there is a lot of different flavors, a lot of different foods in Italy, like we said, that you will not find in North America that we think are Italian. Those things don't exist here. So, just because you're used to going to your local Olive Garden or whatever it is, and you have the chicken parm, they won't have it here. I think just having an open mind, and if you can find what you're looking for, go for that authentic food and just try eating it, try the flavors. They might not be what you're used to, but at least give it a try, give it a go, because you're not going to enjoy yourself if you're just miserable, right? If you need to go to McDonald's and have your little fill of whatever it is, then just don't feel bad. Do it. It's funny because I now travel around Italy, and when I do, I try to go to like non-Italian places. I love Thai food, and where I live, I don't have it. But it's fine if you come to Italy and you crave like Thai food or some other food. Go and have that. There's nothing wrong with being in Italy and having different food, especially if it's something that you're craving or you miss or whatever. So just don't think of it as like a rigid rule, like you have to have this or that. I think you'll have a much better experience if you open your mind to different tastes, different experiences, and even just how Italians eat, right? They eat so very differently than we eat in North America. Breakfast is usually just a coffee and like a cornetto or a quick coffee. And they don't really have big breakfasts. Like lunches are big. We don't eat such big lunches like in Canada. Lunches here are huge. And then dinners are different. I always say to people, if you're really looking for that experience, take a cooking class, take a food tour. Those are great places to explain to you what the food tastes like, what you should look for. And I love the idea that you mentioned to have like a central place to stay, because that's how we traveled too. When we went to Sicily, we were there for 2 weeks, but we would kind of make our way between towns and then stay there for a few days and then do little day trips, because I know that we would be tired. And the last thing you want is just be exhausted because you're driving every night to a different place. So yeah, I think those are very good points that I think we both totally agree on. And having lived in Italy for a few years between us, I think we're not wrong.
We are definitely not wrong. Hey, I have a question for you about Sicily. Did you fly there and rent a car, or did you drive your car, take your car in the ferry?
We drove all the way down and we took the ferry across with the car.
Oh, how was that experience? I haven't done that yet.
It's fine. Yeah, it was fine. I forget the name of the place, but you basically just drive down. There's clear signs. You just drive in, get your ticket like a drive-through. You go line up. Everybody drives onto the ferry. It's about 20 minutes. We had a dog with us, so you can take your dog up on the top, wait till you ferry it, and everybody gets in and drives off. It was seamless. It was really easy. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to doing that. I haven't not yet. In all these years of living in Italy, I have not been to Sicily yet. Can you believe that?
You know what? Sicily is again one of those places that I think people don't always consider to go and visit. And yeah, we did an episode about Sicily because I thought Sicily is such an undiscovered, I mean, I hate saying undiscovered, but it's sort of less visited. And I think people have that perception about it that is probably not what they think it is, which makes it, again, worth discovering. So that's why I'm trying to do this podcast and the blog to kind of show people a different side of Italy, a different experience you can go for. And I would love for you to come back and maybe we can talk about some of the places that you live nearby, which again, you mentioned Lake Como and Lake Garda. I love those places. I would love to have you come back and maybe we can talk about tips for visiting those areas or some other parts in your part of Italy that you would love to share.
No, it would be a pleasure. This has been so fun having this conversation with you. I love talking to someone who is kind of experiencing the same thing as me. It's a rare thing, isn't it, to talk to somebody who gets it the same way that you do as a foreigner living in this amazing country, having this experience in a way that is kind of baffling to local Italians because they look at us like, what? Why is that such a big deal? It's nice to have someone that doesn't give you that funny look when you're talking about how amazing something is that you just discovered for the first time that they just take for granted as locals. But yes, absolutely. And I can't wait to have you on the I'm Moving to Italy podcast as well, because you offer something that we don't talk quite as much about. We talk more about life in Italy, truly as a local, and how to move to Italy and get established. But a lot of our listeners are dreaming about moving to Italy. They haven't yet pulled the trigger on that. And their plan is to maybe retire in Italy, but that's years down the road. And so in the meantime, they're sort of feeding that hunger for all things Italian by traveling in Italy and learning. And they use their travels to discover what they love, where they may want to live. So I think it'd be so great to have you with all your wonderful knowledge and tips about travel to come and share with our listeners who don't get to hear quite as much about travel. That would be so lovely. So yeah, I look forward to that.
Yeah, now that sounds great. And if I do move, I'm happy to share that experience as well. Hopefully it will happen, but we don't know. It was great having you on the show. I'm going to leave your links to your social and your podcast in the show notes. So if you are listening and you're wondering what it was like to move to Italy for Nathan, you are going to love his podcast. And one of the things I love what you do on the podcast is I love those little sounds, the little segment with the local sounds. So we don't do that because I haven't thought of this. And I think it was a bit late to add it now. But yeah, I encourage you guys to go and have a listen. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And Nathan, thank you. It was great having you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Kasia. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
And this brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and review on whatever you're listening right now. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.